In the quiet corners of the world, behind the noise of progress and the glow of modern life, there exists a truth most people never see. A truth so uncomfortable, so deeply woven into the fabric of everyday existence that society chooses to look away. He narrates calmly, letting the weight of the words settle like distant echoes from an unseen past. Because modern slavery is not a relic of ancient history, nor a tragedy confined to textbooks. It is alive, it is expanding, and it hides in plain sight. Today's chains are not made of iron, they are made of dependence, economic desperation, psychological manipulation, digital exploitation, and the silent violence of inequality. Modern slavery thrives in supply chains, in the shadows of globalization, in the unspoken corners of technology, and in the blind spots of institutions that claim to protect human dignity. He continues gently, guiding the listener. To understand modern slavery, one must first understand how the world changed, not through brute force, but through the quiet evolution of systems that prioritize profit over people, efficiency over humanity, and convenience over conscience. In the past, slavery was visible, it was physical, it was openly justified by laws and upheld by empires. But today's slavery hides behind polished corporate language and the illusion of progress. It hides behind words like affordable, fast, and essential. It hides behind supply chains we never question and products we consume without thought. And perhaps the most haunting truth is this: modern slavery persists, not because humanity is cruel by nature, but because humanity is distracted number, overwhelmed by the speed of modern life, conditioned to prioritize comfort over awareness. He reflects softly. In the age of information, ignorance is no longer passive. It is engineered, it is curated, it is rewarded. People are encouraged to consume without asking, to live without questioning, to participate in global systems without understanding the human cost hidden beneath. And so the new forms of slavery grow stronger, not through violence, but through silence, not through chains, but through invisibility. The world has created systems that require exploitation to function. Systems so large that no single person feels responsible, and yet every person plays a part. He pauses internally, letting the thought unfold. Modern slavery exists because it is profitable, because it is efficient, because it is convenient, and because the victims, the millions who suffer quietly, have no voice loud enough to compete with the machines of global commerce. This is the uncomfortable foundation of the modern world, a civilization built on unseen labor, invisible suffering, and stories that never reach the surface. But to face this truth is not an act of despair, it is an act of courage, an act of awakening, because awareness is the first fracture in the chain. And it begins here, with a single question whispered gently into the listener's mind. What if the world you live in, the one that feels normal, functional, and ethical, is built on foundations you were never meant to see? Modern slavery is not a hidden world. It is the world. Only its victims remain hidden. To understand modern slavery, he continues in a calm and steady tone, one must step into the machinery that sustains it. For slavery today is not a single event, nor a single industry, nor a single crime. It is a network, a web of forces, each strand connected to another, forming a structure so intricate that most people never notice the trap. The first mechanism is forced labor. It is the quiet exploitation of men, women, and children who are compelled to work under threats, deception, or circumstances so desperate that refusal is no longer an option. These individuals harvest crops, sew garments, mine minerals, clean homes, and build the very products the world depends on. Their suffering is hidden behind supply chains, sanitized by distance, and transformed into items placed neatly on store shelves. He reflects softly. Forced labor does not always scream for attention. Instead, it whispers. It whispers through exhaustion, through fear, through the heavy silence of those who have learned that speaking out is dangerous. They remain invisible because society benefits from their invisibility. Then comes debt bondage, the most subtle mechanism of all. It is slavery masked as obligation, a promise of opportunity that transforms into captivity. A single loan, a medical bill, a recruitment fee, or a travel cost becomes a weapon. Debts that can never be repaid bind people more effectively than chains ever could, and the world rarely questions the systems that make this exploitation possible, because the consequences happen far beyond the borders of comfort. He continues, debt bondage thrives because it feels legitimate. It thrives because it uses the language of contracts, signatures, and responsibility. But beneath the surface lies a human being, trapped by a debt they did not fully understand, enforced by people who never intended to let them go. Another mechanism is human trafficking, the deliberate capture, transport, or sale of human beings for exploitation. This is the form most people imagine when they hear the word slavery. Yet even in this, society underestimates its scale, its complexity, and its psychological depth. Trafficking is not only physical transportation, it is manipulation, grooming, coercion, and the dismantling of a person's identity until they no longer believe escape is possible. He explains with quiet gravity, trafficking does not require chains, it requires vulnerabilities, poverty, instability, isolation, war, displacement, or the simple longing for a better life. Traffickers prey not on weakness, but on hope. And that is what makes this mechanism so devastating. There is also the exploitation embedded within global supply chains. This is slavery institutionalized through convenience. Every country benefits from it, every economy relies on it, and every consumer contributes to it, often unknowingly. The world wants products that are fast, cheap, and abundant, but those demands cannot be met without someone paying the hidden cost behind every inexpensive garment, every mass-produced item, every smartphone, and every agricultural product. There may be a worker who labored without freedom, without rights, and without recognition. He reflects gently, this is the slavery that hides behind brands, behind logos, behind corporate promises of ethics and sustainability. And although some companies truly fight this system, many rely on layers so complex that abuse becomes easy to ignore. The next mechanism moves deeper into the psychological realm, coercion. Modern slavery thrives not only through physical control, but through emotional, financial, and mental entrapment. Victims may be threatened, isolated, manipulated, or conditioned to believe that escape would bring greater harm. They may fear deportation, violence, shame, or retaliation against their families. Their silence is not compliance, it is survival. He continues with solemn clarity. Coercion is the most powerful tool of modern slavery because it makes the chains internal. A person may walk freely, but still not be free. They may appear unrestrained, yet remain trapped by fear, dependence, or psychological manipulation. Some systems even exploit technology itself. Digital platforms, online recruitment, and global communication networks have made exploitation faster, broader, and easier to conceal. The very tools designed to connect humanity have become tools for capturing it. And beneath all these mechanisms lies a simple truth. Modern slavery is not sustained by individual cruelty, but by systemic indifference. It persists because governments ignore it, corporations benefit from it, communities overlook it, and consumers rarely question the cost behind their comforts. He allows the thought to linger. Modern slavery is not a single crime. It is a system that survives through layers of denial, rationalization, and engineered ignorance. A system that adapts, evolves, and hides in whatever shadows society provides. To see these mechanisms clearly is to begin understanding the scale of the problem. But understanding alone is not enough. One must also confront the emotional truth that the world has constructed an illusion of progress while burying immense suffering just beneath the surface. And the illusion continues to hold because most people never ask who pays the real price for modern life. To understand modern slavery fully, he explains with steady calmness, one must confront a difficult and uncomfortable truth. Slavery continues not only because it is possible, but because it is profitable. Entire structures, institutions, and industries quietly rely on its existence, and although no one openly admits it, too many entities benefit from the suffering of those who cannot speak for themselves. The first beneficiaries are the corporations that hide behind global supply chains. Many of them do not directly enslave anyone, yet they design systems that make exploitation inevitable. They rely on subcontractors, middlemen, and distant factories where oversight is minimal and accountability is easily avoided. They demand lower costs, faster production, and higher output while turning away from the human consequences of those demands. He continues softly. Companies rarely ask why their materials are so cheap. They rarely question why certain factories always deliver on time or why labor costs appear impossibly low. Their ignorance may be strategic, but it is ignorance nonetheless, an ignorance that transforms suffering into profit. Then there are governments, some complicit, others overwhelmed, a few even dependent on forced labor to sustain their economies. Certain nations use prison labor, migrant exploitation, or oppressive labor policies to generate revenue or maintain political control. They benefit from the silence of the powerless and from the reality that international outrage rarely lasts long enough to force real change. He reflects, the world tends to believe that governments always protect the vulnerable, but history shows that power often protects itself first. And in many regions, those trapped in slavery fall outside the protections of citizenship, visibility, and political value. Criminal networks also thrive in this shadowed economy. Human trafficking generates billions each year, making it one of the largest underground industries on the planet. Traffickers profit not only from forced labor, but also from exploitation in domestic work, agriculture, construction, and countless hidden sectors. These organizations exploit instability, war, corruption, and poverty to capture individuals who simply sought a better life. He speaks with quiet gravity. Criminal networks do not see people, they see revenue. They calculate human suffering with financial precision, and as long as the profits outweigh the risks, the cycle will continue. Yet perhaps the most unsettling beneficiary is the ordinary consumer, the everyday individual who unknowingly purchases the products shaped by invisible suffering. Modern society rewards convenience, speed, and low prices. But these desires come at a cost someone else must pay, a cost measured not in currency, but in freedom. He continues, this truth is not meant to blame the individual. Instead, it reveals the complexity of a world where suffering is disguised beneath modern comforts. Most people do not realize the connection between their purchases and the lives of those trapped in exploitation. But lack of awareness does not erase the link. There are also industries that rely on silence, sectors where the exploitation of vulnerable workers is considered a normal part of business. Domestic labor, agricultural labor, and certain manufacturing sectors often operate in the gray zone between legality and violation. In these spaces, modern slavery is not always hidden. Sometimes it is simply ignored. He reflects slowly. Society often distinguishes between legal and illegal, but it rarely asks whether the legal is moral. When a person works exhausting hours for wages they cannot survive on, in conditions that break their bodies and spirits, is that truly freedom? Or is it another form of bondage justified by paperwork and technicalities? Some political groups also benefit from the presence of vulnerable, undocumented, or coerced workers. They use these populations to maintain certain economic sectors while simultaneously refusing them rights. This contradiction creates a class of people who can be exploited without consequence, a class whose silence becomes a political advantage. He explains, slavery persists because it serves someone at every level. It serves the corporations seeking profit. It serves the government seeking stability or control. It serves the criminal networks seeking wealth. It serves the industries seeking cheap labor. And it serves the consumer seeking effortless convenience. The structure is held together by layers of denial, by strategic blindness, and by the comforting illusion that slavery is a relic of the past. But he knows, and anyone who chooses to look closely knows, that slavery is not gone. It has simply evolved into forms that fit the modern world. And the true tragedy is this. Because so many benefit from its existence, meaningful change remains painfully slow. The system survives not because it is hidden, but because acknowledging it requires confronting discomfort, responsibility, and the cost of comfort itself. He concludes this section softly. Modern slavery is not an accident. It is the outcome of choices, priorities, and systems built to favor profit over humanity. And until those foundations are questioned, the cycle will continue. To see who benefits is to see why it persists. And only by understanding this can the world begin to imagine a different way forward. He turns next to the quiet world within the human mind, a place where freedom can be stolen without chains, where captivity can be created through fear, shame, and manipulation. For modern slavery is not only a physical system, it is a psychological one, and understanding this inner landscape is essential to understanding why millions remain trapped even when escape appears possible. The first psychological force is fear. It is the strongest and most reliable tool of any oppressor. Fear of violence, fear of deportation, fear of retaliation, fear of losing one's family, fear of the unknown. These fears are cultivated carefully, reinforced daily, and used to create a mental cage stronger than any physical barrier. Even when doors are left unlocked, fear convinces the victim that escape will bring greater danger than staying. He reflects softly. Fear warps perception. It narrows the world. It convinces the mind that survival depends on obedience. And when fear becomes constant, the brain adapts. A person's sense of possibility shrinks. They learn not to think of escape at all. The next psychological force is shame. Shame is quieter than fear, but just as binding. Victims are often manipulated into believing their suffering is their fault, that they should have been smarter, more cautious, less trusting. They are told that speaking out would bring humiliation, disgrace, or judgment. Shame isolates them. It convinces them that no one will understand and no one will help. He explains gently, shame silences. It keeps people hidden in plain sight, and it feeds the illusion that staying trapped is easier than facing the pain of being seen. Another mechanism is dependency. In many cases, traffickers or exploiters create an artificial sense of reliance. They control food, shelter, identification documents, and financial resources. They make themselves the center of the victim's world, the only source of stability, even if that stability is built on lies. Over time, dependency becomes psychological. A person may fear freedom because freedom means losing the only structure they know. He continues, dependency is not always obvious from the outside. It takes root slowly, subtly, binding the victim emotionally as well as practically. When a person's survival is controlled by another, the mind learns to cling to the controller, even when that relationship is abusive. There is also the mechanism of learned helplessness. This occurs when a person is repeatedly trapped in situations they cannot escape. After enough failures or punishments, the mind stops trying. The individual begins to believe that freedom is impossible, that resistance is pointless, that suffering is inevitable. This psychological submission becomes self-perpetuating. He speaks with solemn clarity. Learned helplessness is not weakness, it is adaptation. It is the mind attempting to preserve itself in a world where agency brings danger. The victim may appear passive, but their passivity is survival. Manipulation is another force, perhaps the most insidious. Exploiters often present themselves as protectors, partners, employers, or friends. They build trust, then slowly dismantle boundaries. They create confusion, guilt, and emotional instability. Victims learn to doubt their instincts, question their memories, and distrust their own perceptions. In this psychological fog, the exploiter becomes the only steady reference point. He reflects, manipulation reshapes reality. It creates a world where the victim believes they owe loyalty to their abuser, or where they believe they have no right to ask for help. This confusion is intentional. It keeps the victim compliant. Some victims are also controlled through hope, the promise of a better future that never arrives. Exploiters offer opportunities, pathways to citizenship, financial independence, or freedom. These promises are dangled like distant stars, always shining but always out of reach. Yet the mere existence of hope can keep a person trapped in suffering much longer than fear alone. He continues softly. Hope, when weaponized, becomes a chain made of dreams. It keeps the victim moving forward, believing that if they endure a little longer, everything will change. But for many, the promised transformation never comes. The exploitation also connects to cultural and familial pressures. In some cases, individuals endure slavery because they do not want to bring shame to their families, or because they have been raised to accept authority without question. They may believe suffering is part of their duty, or that loyalty requires silence. Cultural values, when distorted or abused, can become powerful psychological restraints. And finally, trauma itself becomes a mechanism of enslavement. The longer a person endures abuse, the more their nervous system adapts to survival mode. They become hyper-aware, cautious, anxious, and exhausted. Their ability to plan, to resist, to take risks, or to trust others deteriorates. Trauma shrinks the world to a single priority: endure the next moment, and when life becomes moment-to-moment survival, escape becomes unthinkable. He pauses internally, though his voice remains calm, and reflects. The psychology of enslavement reveals the deepest truth of modern slavery. It does not persist merely because people are forced into it, but because systems, abusers, and circumstances shape the mind to believe there is no alternative. Captivity becomes normal. Fear becomes familiar. Pain becomes predictable, and the unknown becomes terrifying. He concludes this section with quiet gravity. When a person's internal world has been reshaped by fear, shame, manipulation, and trauma, freedom becomes more than a physical challenge. It becomes a psychological journey, one that requires not only escape, but healing, the slow rebuilding of identity, trust, and the belief that one's life can belong to oneself again.